The mid-April sun in Denver, Colorado, always arrived with a deceptive brilliance. It poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Vance residence, flooding the open-concept kitchen with a blinding, pristine light that reflected off the white quartz countertops. Yet, despite the sun-drenched aesthetic worthy of an architectural magazine, the air inside remained stubbornly cold. In the corner, a high-end espresso machine hissed and hummed, conducting a lonely, mechanical monologue against the vast, empty silence of the house. Amber stood before the stove, her movements fluid but entirely mechanical. It was exactly 5 a.m. For the past 6 years, her internal clock had been violently rewired to this exact minute. She carefully flipped the artisanal sourdough in the pan, ensuring the poached eggs were dropped at the precise second to achieve the perfect, velvety yolk her husband demanded. Next to the stove sat a stainless steel lunchbox. Amber packed it with meticulous care, slicing organic apples into perfect, unblemished wedges, and arranging a balanced, nutrient-rich meal for their 10-year-old son, Ethan. She even aligned the small container of almond butter perfectly parallel to the sandwich wrapper. It was a subconscious, tragic relic of her past life as a top-tier graphic and UI/UX designer, back when she used to align pixels on a digital canvas instead of celery sticks in a plastic box. When she caught her reflection in the polished surface of the microwave, she quickly looked away. An oversized, faded linen apron covered a washed-out sweater. Her hair, once a vibrant chestnut that she styled with pride, was yanked back into a hasty, utilitarian bun, held together by a cheap plastic claw clip. She had become an antique fixture in her own home, functional, weathered, and entirely overlooked. At exactly 6:45 a.m., the heavy, rhythmic tread of bespoke leather shoes echoed down the hallway. Derek entered the kitchen. He was a man chiseled by ambition, his tailored navy suit sharp enough to cut glass, exhaling the faint, expensive scent of sandalwood and success. He didn't look at Amber. He never looked at Amber. To Derek, she was a ghost that cooked, a domestic variable that kept the house running while he scaled the heights as the CEO of a rising tech startup. He slid into his seat, his eyes entirely glued to the glowing screen of his iPhone. Amber placed the perfectly curated breakfast plate in front of him. "Your coffee has a double shot of espresso today," she said, her voice soft, carrying a desperate, fragile hope for a sliver of human connection. "I noticed you were working late on the new tech layout last night." Derek didn't look up. He merely muttered a curt, dismissive, and reached for his fork. Suddenly, Amber's phone pings on the counter. It was a notification from Spend Time, a financial tracking app that Derek had forced her to install. The banner read, "Transaction flagged, $18.42 at Trader Joe's. Awaiting admin approval." A familiar, icy lump formed in Amber's throat. Every single dollar she spent on groceries, on Ethan's school supplies, or on medicine for her ailing mother-in-law was strictly audited and micromanaged by Derek. When she didn't say anything, the silence returned, not a peaceful, quiet morning silence, but the heavy, weaponized vacuum of the silent treatment, the cold violence of emotional abandonment. Derek used his silence like a scalpel, cutting away her confidence, day by day, leaving her feeling utterly insignificant. The heavy atmosphere shifted slightly when Ethan shuffled into the kitchen. At 10 years old, Ethan was a deeply sensitive boy, carrying the anxious demeanor of a child who had learned to navigate a home built on eggshells. He sat down quietly, pulling his school backpack onto his lap like a shield. "Morning, buddy." Amber smiled, her warmth returning instantly as she kissed the top of his head. "Ready for Friday?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a crumpled, glossy flyer from Lincoln Elementary School. He held it in his small hands, hesitating, his eyes darting nervously between his mother's tired face and his father's rigid, indifferent posture. He knew his father's schedule was a sacred, untouchable empire, and he knew his mother had slowly shrunk away from the outside world, rarely leaving the perimeter of their neighborhood. "Dad, Mom," Ethan choked out, his voice small. "Today is family lunch day. The school sent a flyer last month. Parents are supposed to come eat pizza with us in the cafeteria at noon. Most of the parents are coming." Derek finally lowered his phone, his brow furrowing into a sharp, impatient line. He checked his Rolex with an exaggerated flick of his wrist. "Absolutely impossible, Ethan," Derek said, his tone flat and unyielding. "I have a mandatory tea time at 12 sharp with Harrison Miller. He is the largest angel investor in the Denver metro area. If I skip this golf game, the company loses millions in potential funding. My schedule is unnegotiable." Ethan's shoulders visibly slumped, his gaze dropping to his shoes. "Oh, okay." Amber felt a sudden, sharp pang of maternal instinct pierce through her usual compliance. She looked at her son's crestfallen face, and then at Derek. "Derek, he's been talking about this for weeks. Can't you just push the meeting by an hour? It's just one lunch." Derek rose from the table, smoothing the front of his pristine suit jacket. For the first time that morning, he turned his cold, piercing eyes directly onto Amber. He didn't yell. His voice was dangerously low, dripping with a quiet, devastating contempt. "You should just stay home, Amber. Look at yourself," Derek said, his words delivering a calculated blow to her remaining self-esteem. "The school will be packed with Denver's top executives, CEOs, and families who actually care about how they present themselves to the community. You dress like a housekeeper and your mind is entirely consumed by diapers and kitchen grease. If you go to that school looking like a charity case, you will only make the boy embarrassed in front of his friends. Let it go." Without waiting for a response, Derek grabbed his briefcase, turning his back on his family. The heavy oak front door slammed shut a moment later, the vibration rattling the delicate porcelain cups on the kitchen counter. Left in the suffocating quiet of the kitchen, Amber stood completely frozen by the sink, the cold Colorado sun casting her long, lonely shadow against the blank white wall. Next to her, Ethan sat in absolute silence, staring down at his untouched breakfast. By 11:45 a.m., the gray, heavy clouds of Denver had completely swallowed the morning sun, throwing a bleak, sterile light over the concrete facade of Lincoln Elementary School. Outside, the parking lot was already jammed with luxury SUVs and polished sedans, their hazards blinking as well-dressed parents hurried toward the main entrance. Inside her old, dented sedan, Amber sat with her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her heart hammered against her ribs. 10 minutes ago, the school secretary had called. "Mrs. Vance, we notice Ethan is the only child in his class without a registered family member for lunch day. He told his teacher his father was saving the world, and you were unavailable. Is everything all right?" The words had pierced through Amber's numbing routine like a physical blow. She hadn't even looked in the mirror. She had simply grabbed her keys, thrown on her faded winter coat, and thrown her old design portfolio bag over her shoulder before sprinting out the door. As she rushed toward the heavy glass doors of the school, the chilly Colorado wind whipped through her disheveled bun. She reached for the handle, but before she could pull, a firm hand wrapped around the frame from the inside. "Hold on, ma'am. Please step back," a deep, commanding voice ordered. Amber stumbled back, her eyes meeting the stern, unyielding gaze of Officer Marcus, the school resource officer. He stood positioned right inside the doorway, his uniform crisp, his hand resting instinctively near his utility belt. The strict post-tragedy security protocols of American schools allowed no exceptions, and to an experienced officer, Amber's frantic breathing, tangled hair, and worn-out sneakers raised immediate red flags. "I need you to step up to the security window and scan your ID, ma'am," Officer Marcus said, his eyes tracking her movement with a quiet alertness. All bags must go through the metal detector. No unregistered visitors allowed past the perimeter. I'm Ethan Vance's mother. Amber gasped, her voice trembling as she fumbled through her pockets, desperately looking for her driver's license. I received a phone call. I need to get to the cafeteria. The lunch started 15 minutes ago. I understand, but the rules are the rules, Officer Marcus replied, his tone remaining neutral but entirely inflexible. He took her ID, scanning it slowly through the computer system, while Amber watched the second hand of the wall clock tick away, mercilessly. Every tick felt like a public execution of her dignity. When she placed her canvas bag on the security table, the machine beeped loudly. Officer Marcus systematically unzipped it, revealing an old, dusty digital drawing tablet and a tangle of charging cords, the forgotten relics of her former career. He inspected them thoroughly, item by item, while other neatly dressed parents glided past the secondary clearance, casting curious, judgmental glances at her. All right, you're clear, Officer Marcus finally said, handing back her badge. Keep the bag zipped. The cafeteria is straight down the hall to the left. Amber didn't say a word. She snatched her bag and practically ran down the polished linoleum hallway, the heavy scent of industrial cleaner and melted cheese filling the air. When she pushed open the double doors of the cafeteria, a wall of chaotic sound hit her. Hundreds of high-pitched voices laughing, silverware clattering, and parents chatting animatedly. The room was a vibrant, overwhelming display of suburban privilege. Tables were overflowing with colorful, expensive takeout boxes, gourmet wood-fired pizzas, and beautiful bakery desserts brought in by proud mothers and affluent fathers. Amber's eyes scanned the sea of faces, searching frantically, until her gaze finally landed on the very edge of the room. There sat Ethan. He looked so small, his 10-year-old shoulders hunched forward as if trying to disappear into the plastic bench. Because Amber hadn't filled out the premium RSVP form weeks in advance, Ethan hadn't been allocated a special family meal. Instead, sitting on the table in front of him was a gray, generic school lunch tray. A lukewarm, soggy slice of cafeteria pizza and a tiny carton of low-fat milk sat entirely untouched. He was the only child at his table, sitting alone. Every other seat was occupied by an attentive, smiling adult. Just 3 seats down, Julian, the son of the prominent tech investor Harrison Miller, was surrounded by his entire family. Julian looked at Ethan's empty adjacent seat, then at the sad institutional pizza tray, and let out a loud, mocking laugh. "Hey, Ethan," Julian sneered, his voice carrying easily over the table. "Did your dad forget you existed today? My dad says people who eat the free school lunch only do it because their parents are failures. I guess your family is just too poor to show up." Ethan didn't shout back. He didn't move. He just stared down at the gray plastic tray, his small fingers clenching into tight fists, his lower lip trembling violently as he swallowed his tears. He looked completely abandoned, suffocating under the heavy weight of his classmates' cruel whispers. Amber felt a sudden, terrifying wave of maternal rage shatter her timidity. Breaking through her fear of the crowd, she threw her shoulders back and strode purposefully toward the table. "He is not alone, Julian," Amber announced, her voice cutting cleanly through the immediate chatter. Ethan's head snapped up. His tear-filled eyes widened as he saw his mother walking toward him, her worn coat flying behind her. Amber slid onto the hard plastic bench right next to her son, pulling him into a tight, fierce embrace. She could feel his small frame shaking against her chest. "I'm here, sweetie," Amber whispered into his hair, ignoring the curious stares of the parents around them. "I'm so sorry I'm late. I'm right here." Ethan buried his face in her faded sweater, his fingers gripping her sleeve like a lifeline. He was safe, but as Amber looked across the table and caught the cold, elitist smirk of Harrison Miller observing her disheveled appearance, she knew the nightmare of this day was far from over. The ambient noise of Lincoln Elementary's cafeteria felt less like a school function and more like an arena of quiet judgments. The clatter of plastic trays, the high-pitched laughter of children, and the low, collective murmur of wealthy Denver parents created a wall of sound that seemed to press inward on Amber. She sat on the edge of the small, attached bench, trying to shrink her physical presence as much as possible. She felt acutely aware of the dust on her sneakers, the faint stain of morning grease on her oversized sweater, and the stray strands of hair slipping from her claw clip. Next to her, Ethan kept his eyes glued to his tray. The school lunch, a lukewarm slice of cafeteria pizza and a carton of low-fat milk, lay entirely untouched. Just 3 seats down, Julian, the son of the prominent tech investor Harrison Miller, was holding court. Julian's father sat beside him, dressed in an impeccably casual designer polo, occasionally nodding as his son whispered something to the other boys at the table. "My dad says real executives don't miss family events unless it's for something important," Julian whispered, loudly, casting a sharp, mocking glance toward Ethan's empty adjacent seat. "I guess some people just aren't important." Ethan's chest heaved. He swallowed hard, his lower lip trembling as he gripped the edge of the plastic table. Amber reached out, placing her hand gently over her son's small, cold fingers. "Hey," she whispered, her voice laced with an aching empathy. "Look at me, Ethan. It's okay. We are here together." But before Ethan could lift his eyes, a sudden shift occurred near the double doors of the cafeteria. The room's collective gaze drifted toward the entrance, where the heavy security doors had just swung open. Amber turned her head, and her heart dropped into her stomach. Walking into the room was Derek. He had not gone to the golf course. Or rather, he had followed the golf course's most lucrative asset right back to the school. Walking a half step behind him was Chloe, his 24-year-old marketing director and strategic partner. Chloe looked immaculate, a vision of youthful professionalism in a tailored cream trench coat, her hair falling in perfect, glossy waves. Derek's eyes scanned the room with predatory precision, completely ignoring the children until his gaze locked onto the table where Harrison Miller sat. A flash of naked ambition crossed Derek's face. He began to stride forward, preparing his best corporate smile, when his eyes suddenly caught the disheveled figure sitting right next to the Miller family's table. He froze, his face contorted from calculated charm to pure, unadulterated fury. Derek didn't greet his son. He didn't acknowledge the event. Instead, he marched straight toward Amber, his leather shoes clicking sharply against the linoleum. Before Harrison Miller could notice the connection, Derek grabbed Amber firmly by the upper arm. His grip wasn't physically violent, but it carried the terrifying, rigid force of his disapproval. "Get up," Derek hissed under his breath, his voice a lethal, controlled whisper. "Now." Amber, startled and instinctively wanting to avoid a scene that would traumatize Ethan further, rose from the bench. Derek guided her swiftly, almost forcefully, out of the main dining area and into the shadowed alcove near the vending machines in the back hallway. Chloe followed them, stepping into the hallway with a delicate, deliberate grace. She leaned against the wall, crossing her arms, her eyes observing Amber with a mixture of profound condescension and performative pity. "What the hell are you doing here?" Derek snarled the moment they were out of earshot of the main crowd. His face was flushed, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles rippled. "I told you to stay home. Look at you, Amber. You look like a common maid who wandered into a private gala. You are a walking disaster." Derek, Ethan was the only child. Amber started, her voice breaking, the old habits of explanation and justification rising to her throat. She felt the familiar sting of tears pricking the corners of her eyes. She wanted to tell him how hard it was, how much Ethan was hurting, how unfair this treatment was. I don't care about your excuses. Derek cut her off, his hand gesturing dismissively toward her clothes. Harrison Miller is sitting right out there. I have spent 6 months trying to get this man to anchor our series of funding. And you show up looking like a charity case sitting right next to his son, reminding everyone of the domestic baggage I have to drag around. Don't you dare humiliate me in front of Mr. Harrison. Go out there, grab your things, and leave through the back exit. You are ruining my life's work. Chloe let out a soft, theatrical sigh, adjusting her trench coat. Amber, really? Chloe chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. You have to think about Derek's professional brand. Perception is everything in Denver tech. This lifestyle choice of yours just doesn't align with where the company is going. It's just sad. Amber stood under the barrage of their contempt. For years, this was the moment where she would collapse inward. She would cry. She would apologize. She would go home and lock herself in the bathroom, drowning in the suffocating waters of the silent treatment, wondering what she had done wrong to deserve such invisibility. She looked past Derek's shoulder, through the glass pane of the hallway door. She saw Ethan. The boy was staring at the hallway, his eyes wide with fear, watching his parents, his shoulders hunched as if waiting for a blow. He looked exactly like she felt, a victim of someone else's cruelty. And right then, in the quiet, sterile hallway of Lincoln Elementary, something snapped. It wasn't an explosion of anger. It wasn't a desire to scream or tear down the walls. It was something far more profound. It was a sudden, blinding clarity. The realization hit her with the force of a tidal wave. No one was coming to save her. Not Derek, not a change in circumstances, not the universe. She had spent 6 years waiting for Derek to value her, playing the martyr, nursing her resentment, and crying over her lost potential. By allowing herself to be treated as a victim, she was teaching Ethan to be one too. The tears in Amber's eyes dried instantly. The trembling in her hands stopped. A profound, icy stillness washed over her soul. She stepped out of Derek's physical space, drawing herself up to her full height. She didn't look at Chloe. Chloe didn't exist anymore. Amber looked directly into Derek's eyes, her gaze so steady, so utterly devoid of fear or affection, that Derek actually took an involuntary half-step back. I am Ethan's mother, Amber said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a terrifying, resonant calm that echoed off the concrete walls. And I am deeply, profoundly proud to stand by his side today. I don't care about your funding, Derek, and I don't care about your brand. Derek's eyes widened in shock. Amber, you don't talk to me. Look at you, Amber interrupted, her voice filled not with hatred, but with a cold, devastating realization. You are terrified of a man sitting in a cafeteria because your entire worth is built on what other people think of you. You think my clothes make you look bad. Your absolute emptiness as a father is the only pathetic thing in this building. Before Derek could process the words, before his fury could turn into another lecture, Amber turned her back on him. She didn't run. She walked with a measured, deliberate pace back into the cafeteria. She felt the eyes of the room return to her. She saw Officer Marcus, the school resource officer, standing near the door, his eyes tracking her movement with a quiet alertness. She didn't care. She walked straight to the table, took Ethan's trembling hand in hers, and picked up his backpack. Come on, sweetie, Amber said, offering her son a smile that was entirely real, entirely grounded. We're going home. Ethan looked up at his mother, sensing the massive, invisible tectonic shift that had just occurred within her. He nodded, standing up taller. Hand in hand, the mother and son walked out of the crowded cafeteria, passing right by a stunned Derek and an uncomfortable Chloe. As the heavy doors closed behind them, Amber didn't look back once. The era of her crying was over. The era of her survival had begun. The drive home from Lincoln Elementary was conducted in a heavy but profoundly clean silence. For the first time in 6 years, the quiet within the car wasn't a weapon used to isolate Amber. It was a sanctuary of her own making. As she navigated the wide avenues of Denver, she felt the phantom weight of Derek's grip fading from her arm, replaced by an electric clarity. The moment she and Ethan stepped back inside the house, with its pristine, sterile drywall walls, she looked at her surroundings not with the usual despair, but with the cold eye of a strategist. She realized that the invisible prison of her marriage only held power if she chose to remain its cooperative inmate. The mindset shift that had ignited in the school hallway wasn't a fleeting burst of adrenaline. It solidified instantly into a tactical blueprint. Amber consciously decided to stop mourning her lost youth, to stop blaming Derek's cruelty, and to permanently retire from the role of the tragic martyr. She recognized a hard truth central to the pragmatic landscape of modern American life. No one was coming to rescue her, and resentment was a luxury she could no longer afford. Absolute ownership of her happiness was the only way forward. There would be no more miraculous expectations, no reliance on luck, and no useless tears. Independence required a ledger, a strategy, and an uncompromising iron discipline. She was going to rebuild her life from the bedrock up, dollar by dollar, pixel by pixel. The execution of this practical action plan began that very afternoon. Amber opened her old laptop, a piece of hardware Derek had long dismissed as an outdated toy. With deliberate, precise keystrokes, she began to reach out to her dormant professional network in New York and San Francisco. She didn't seek sympathy. Instead, she offered raw, high-level technical precision. Under her old college middle name, she established a clean, formidable digital identity, Aria Vance. She launched a brand new Behance portfolio, showcasing restored archival concepts alongside bold, speculative modern interfaces, and built a highly optimized LinkedIn profile for remote consulting. The digital canvas became her secret, sovereign continent. The American tech ecosystem was booming, but it was cutthroat. To survive, she needed to bridge her 6-year career gap with undeniable cutting-edge mastery. Her daily routine quickly became a masterclass in temporal architecture and sheer human endurance. From dawn until dusk, she remained the hyper-present, deeply grounded mother Ethan needed, ensuring his school schedules were seamless, his meals were perfect, and his emotional security was absolute. She protected his peace fiercely. But at exactly 10 p.m., after Ethan's breathing synchronized into deep, peaceful sleep and Derek retreated to his separate wing of the house in frosted, arrogant silence, Amber's true day began. In the dim, cool glow of her monitor, from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., she plunged headfirst into the deep end of contemporary design technology. Looking out her window at the distant silhouettes of the Rocky Mountains, she found a strange, meditative healing in the absolute logic of software. She devoured advanced 3D rendering methodologies, mastered complex predictive Figma prototyping variables, and integrated generative AI design workflows into her creative pipeline. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, translating physical exhaustion into fluid, high-converting interface layouts. The learning curve was steep, but her mind adapted with terrifying speed, starved for purpose. Soon, the pseudonym Aria became a highly sought-after commodity in freelance forums. Small design contracts from California tech startups rapidly escalated into lucrative, high-stakes consulting retainers. To bypass the financial tracking app Derek used to monitor her every move, Amber set up a private, digital-only bank account at an out-of-state institution, routing her freelance revenue into a secure escrow. She managed every invoice down to the last cent, taking absolute responsibility for her own financial trajectory. Watching the balance grow became a quiet, steely confirmation of her autonomy. By the arrival of the second month, this profound internal evolution demanded a radical external manifestation. One Tuesday afternoon, while Ethan was at soccer practice, Amber stood resolutely before the bathroom mirror. She stared at the long, frayed, split-ended chestnut hair that she had bound in cheap plastic claw clips for years, a visual archive of her self-neglect. Taking a pair of professional shears, she didn't hesitate for a single second. She cut the first thick lock herself, watching it fall into the porcelain basin like discarded chains. A master stylist downtown completed the transformation, sculpting her hair into a sharp, asymmetrical, modern bob that framed her jawline with architectural precision. It was bold, clean, and unapologetically professional. Next came the systematic purging of her physical environment. She cleared out the shapeless, oversized linen layers, the faded sweatshirts, and the drab lounge clothes that had allowed her to blend into the background of Derek's life. In their place, utilizing her own completely independent freelance capital, she curated a concise capsule wardrobe of high-quality, minimalist tailored suits. She selected structured blazers in deep obsidian, rich charcoal gray, and crisp ivory, paired with sharp trousers and heavy silk blouses that felt real against her skin. This stylistic pivot was entirely devoid of malice or spite. She wasn't constructing a shallow weapon of revenge to flash provocatively in Derek's face. She was buying armor. She was investing heavily in a precise visual language that commanded instant authority within the American corporate ecosystem, finally treating her own body, her time, and her presence with the profound dignity they had always deserved. As the 90-day mark approached, the reflection in the mirror no longer bore any resemblance to the ghost of the Vance household. Amber stood tall, her posture elongated, her mind sharp, and her finances completely autonomous. She had successfully transitioned from a passive, weeping bystander in her own tragedy to the chief executive officer of her destiny. The blueprint was complete, the foundation was poured. All that remained was the inevitable catalyst that would test the strength of her new empire. The atmosphere inside the glass-walled boardroom of Miller Capital, perched arrogantly on the top floor of a downtown Denver skyscraper, was utterly suffocating. Outside, the panoramic, wide-angle view offered a staggering display of the snow-capped, jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains cutting into a bleak, gray sky. But inside, the climate was pure ice. The silence in the room was heavy, punctured only by the hum of the overhead ventilation system and the hyperventilating breaths of the executives trapped within. Harrison Miller sat at the absolute head of the massive custom-carved mahogany conference table. He didn't lean back. He sat perfectly rigid, radiating the immense, terrifying gravity of a multi-billionaire tech mogul who viewed incompetence not just as a financial liability, but as a personal insult. His tailored charcoal suit looked immaculate, contrasting sharply with the chaotic state of the people sitting across from him. Across the polished wood, Derek looked like a man standing before a firing squad. Sweat glistened under his receding hairline, dark patches soaking the armpits of his expensive, custom-tailored navy blazer. For the first time in 6 years, his arrogant, unyielding posture was completely broken. His hands, usually gesturing with dismissive authority, were resting flat on the table, trembling slightly. Next to him, Chloe looked like a ghost. Her youthfulness, which she usually weaponized as a tool of strategic condescension, had vanished. Her face was entirely pale, her glossy lips parted in silent horror as her fingers nervously swiped across a tablet displaying a disastrous real-time market metrics report. The highly publicized digital campaign that Chloe had designed and Derek had personally bankrolled to launch their startup's flagship platform had tanked within exactly 48 hours. The target demographic had rejected the superficial, overly corporate interface, causing a massive public relations nightmare and an immediate catastrophic drop in user acquisition. Your metrics are not just a disappointment, Derek. They are an absolute freefall, Harrison Miller said. His voice didn't rise in anger. Instead, it dropped like a solid iron anvil into the frozen silence of the boardroom, vibrating through the glass walls. My investment firm does not anchor sinking ships. We do not subsidize vanity projects masquerading as innovation. If you cannot present a flawless, comprehensive architectural pivot by the end of this afternoon, Miller Capital is officially pulling the series of funding. And we both know exactly what that means for your firm. Bankruptcy. Total, unmitigated obliteration of Derek's life's work. The company he had sacrificed his family for. The executive title he used as a shield to bully his wife. The brand he worshipped. All of it was about to dissolve into thin air. Derek swallowed hard, his jaw clenching so tightly the muscles rippled beneath his skin. He opened his mouth, desperately trying to construct a polished, defensive corporate justification, ready to throw Chloe under the bus to save his own skin. Mr. Miller, if you look at the secondary engagement metrics, the underlying algorithms, save the rhetoric, Derek. I don't buy excuses, and I certainly don't invest in them. Harrison cut him off cleanly, his voice sharp as a razor. Fortunately for your shareholders, my chief investment officer refused to let this asset die without a fight. Over the last 30 days, my firm quietly retained the services of an elite, independent enterprise strategist and creative architect out of New York. Someone who spent the last month running a silent, deep dive audit on your structural flaws and building a bulletproof alternative layout. She arrived 10 minutes ago. Harrison nodded toward the heavy, frosted glass double doors at the far end of the boardroom. The brass handles turned, and the doors swung open with a quiet, highly authoritative click. Derek and Chloe turned their heads simultaneously, expecting an older, seasoned Wall Street executive, perhaps a cynical consultant ready to tear them apart. Instead, time seemed to dilate, slowing down to an agonizing crawl as a woman stepped over the threshold. She walked into the room with an effortless, fluid grace, her posture perfectly elongated. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of her elegant black stiletto heels against the hardwood floor sounded like a countdown clock. Her outfit was a masterpiece of minimalist corporate authority. A bespoke, structured obsidian blazer that pulled in sharply at her waist, paired with perfectly tailored charcoal wool trousers, and a heavy cream silk blouse that caught the ambient light of the room. Her hair, which had been bound in cheap, plastic claw clips for years, was gone. In its place was a sharp, asymmetrical, modern bob that framed her face, sculpting her defined jawline with architectural precision. Her eyes were bright, clear, and absolutely devoid of fear. It was amber. Derek's breath caught violently in his throat, a choked, strangled sound escaping his lips. He half rose from his leather chair, his knees buckling slightly as his eyes widened in a mixture of profound shock, utter disbelief, and total cognitive dissonance. His brain simply refused to compute the data before him. The woman standing at the head of a billionaire's boardroom was the same woman he had left crying in the shadows of an elementary school hallway, the same woman he had dismissed as a common housemaid. Amber. Derek choked out, his voice cracking beneath the weight of his confusion. Beside him, Chloe gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. The carefully constructed mask of professional superiority she had worn for months shattered into 1,000 invisible pieces. Her eyes darted from Amber's expensive, tailored blazer to her flawless hair, realization hitting her like a physical blow. Amber did not look at them with anger. She did not flash a smug smile of petty vengeance, nor did she acknowledge the bitter, domestic history that lay like buried landmines between them. She looked at them with the calm, detached, and completely indifferent professional courtesy one extends to total strangers. To Amber, the man who had inflicted years of cold, suffocating emotional violence upon her was no longer a tormentor. He was merely an inefficient variable in a broken corporate machine. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," Amber said. Her voice was rich, resonant, and entirely steady, carrying the precise, unshakable cadence of the digital identity she had forged in the dark hours of the night, Aria Vance. She walked directly to the presentation podium at the head of the table, completely ignoring Derek's staring eyes. With smooth, practiced efficiency, she opened her high-end laptop and plugged it into the boardroom's central media hub. Instantly, the massive wall-sized interactive digital displays came to life, projecting a breathtaking, fully realized 3D user experience ecosystem. For the next 45 minutes, Amber absolutely commanded the room. She did not just present a design, she delivered a masterclass in technological warfare. With terrifying clarity and sharp corporate eloquence, she dissected the fundamental psychological and structural errors in Chloe's superficial marketing framework. The current interface operates on a legacy framework that treats the user as a passive consumer, Amber explained, her laser pointer cutting through the data arrays on the screen. By shifting the core architecture to a decentralized, predictive UI/UX flow, we reduce friction by 42% and leverage generative AI data streams to adapt to real-time user behavior. She spoke the complex, high-stakes language of contemporary American technology with absolute, unshakable mastery, moving fluidly between back-end database logic and front-end emotional design. She presented a complete, ironclad cure for the startup's terminal illness. The senior analysts sitting along the edges of the room began nodding vigorously, scribbling notes frantically. Harrison Miller leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, deeply impressed smile spreading across his face. When Amber concluded her final slide, the room of seasoned executives erupted into spontaneous, genuine applause. "Brilliant," Harrison Miller said, standing up to walk over and shake her hand. "Aria, you haven't just saved the deployment. You've elevated this entire platform to a global scale. The series of funding stays. Derek, you will execute Aria's blueprint down to the last syllable under her direct supervision, or my firm is done with you forever. Good day." An hour later, the boardroom finally emptied out. Amber gathered her things, her movements precise, packing her laptop away with a calm, rhythmic silence. She walked out of the glass tower and stepped into the underground parking garage, the cool, concrete-era welcome relief. But as she reached the door of her SUV, the heavy, desperate thud of running leather shoes echoed behind her. "Amber, wait, please, Amber." Derek cried out. His voice was completely stripped of every ounce of the arrogant, icy coldness he had used as a weapon to starve her soul for 6 years. He ran to her side, his face a grotesque mask of desperate panic and sweaty humiliation. He looked at her sharp new haircut, her expensive capsule wardrobe, and the absolute, unyielding power radiating from her presence. For the first time in his life, the veil of his own narcissism was torn away, and he realized the catastrophic, planetary magnitude of what he had thrown away. He was looking at a queen he had tried to treat as a servant. Without warning, Derek's knees buckled. He dropped heavily onto the concrete floor of the garage, right at her feet, his hands reaching out to grab the hem of her obsidian blazer. "Amber, I'm begging you," he sobbed, his voice cracking, tears finally spilling over his eyes. "I was blind. I was under so much stress. I didn't see how brilliant you were. Please come back to the company. Come back home. Let's rebuild the family. I'll change the tracking apps. I'll give you everything you ever wanted. Just don't leave me alone in this." Amber looked down at the man, kneeling on the oil-stained concrete before her. For years, During the darkest nights in the Vance household, she had fantasized about this exact moment. She had dreamed of the sweet, burning taste of revenge, of screaming her pain into his face, of making him feel the suffocating weight of the invisibility he had cursed her with. But as she stood there, looking at his trembling, pathetic frame, she felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no hatred, no urge to mock him. The emotional prison he had built for her had no more power over her soul because she had walked out of it the moment she stopped playing the victim. By taking absolute, radical responsibility for her own life, she had outgrown him entirely. He was a small man who had stopped growing, and she was a force of nature. She gently but firmly pulled the fabric of her blazer out of his trembling grip. From her leather briefcase, she pulled out 2 neatly bound folders and placed them flat on the clean hood of her car. The blue folder contains the finalized design assets, the back-end documentation, and the strategic contracts for Miller Capital, Amber said. Her voice did not shake. It was filled with a beautiful, healing serenity that felt as solid as the mountains above them. It is my final act as a professional partner. Your company is safe, Derek. You have your crown back. She tapped the white folder next to it. The white folder contains a signed divorce decree. The terms are perfectly fair. It protects Ethan's financial future, secures his education, and grants me full, uncompromised legal custody. Sign it today, Derek. Don't fight it in court. We both know you don't have the leverage, the money, or the public image to survive a battle with me anymore. She didn't wait for his answer. She didn't stay to watch him weep over the folders. She got into the driver's seat of her car, started the engine, and smoothly backed out of the space, leaving Derek alone in the dark shadows of the concrete garage, clutching a white folder to his chest. 20 minutes later, Amber pulled up to the curb of Lincoln Elementary School. The bell had just rung, and the double doors burst open as children spilled out into the afternoon air. Ethan ran out among them, his heavy backpack bouncing against his shoulders. The moment his eyes landed on the curb, he froze. He saw his mother. She was standing outside the car, her sharp new haircut catching the light, her radiant ivory suit making her look like a beacon of pure strength. The profound, unburdened light dancing in her eyes was something he had never seen before. Ethan's face lit up with a brilliant, triumphant pride. He ran down the steps and scrambled into the passenger seat, his chest heaving with excitement. "Hey, partner." Amber smiled, reaching over to gently ruffle his hair. "Let's go for a drive. Just the 2 of us." They drove west, leaving the grid of the city, the heavy traffic, and the concrete prisons behind. The roads began to twist and climb, ascending into the grand, open spaces of the foothills where the Great Plains met the massive rise of the Rocky Mountains. The clock on the dashboard read exactly 6 p.m., the golden hour. The Colorado sun was sinking low behind the peaks, painting the vast, endless western sky in brilliant, breathtaking ribbons of deep amber, vibrant violet, and melted gold. Amber turned off the engine at a scenic overlook. She and Ethan stepped out of the vehicle, walking together to the very edge of the wooden ridge. The cool, clean, pine-scented mountain wind swept violently across the peak, catching the short, modern strands of her asymmetrical bob, lifting the fabric of her suit. Amber stood tall, her posture unyielding, leaning lightly against the frame of the car. She looked out at the infinite horizon, her chest expanding as she took a deep, clean breath of mountain air. There were no tears in her eyes. There was no lingering bitterness in her heart, no phantom echoes of the cold house, the silent dinners, or the sterile walls that had held her hostage. The past had lost its grip completely. She stood bathed in the warm, golden light, abundantly free, profoundly proud, and fiercely independent. She reached down, wrapping her fingers around Ethan's small, warm hand, squeezing it gently. Ethan looked up at her, his eyes filled with absolute trust and adoration, and squeezed back. They smiled at each other in the quiet evening air, completely at peace, ready to walk together into the beautiful, unwritten future. All shadows must fade before the truth, and every pain is simply the start of a beautiful rebirth. Always remember, the right to write a new chapter of your life is forever in your hands. See you on the next page.